Welcome to another interview in the Legends program of the American Academy for Park and Recreation Administration. The program records the highlights of the careers of individuals whose leadership, vision, and passion influenced and shaped the park and recreation profession. The program is sponsored by Landscape Structures. I'm Dawn Collins, and it is my privilege to interview Charles Eatherly, who was selected by the Academy to be recognized as a legend in our field. Charles, can you tell us about your education in the parks and recreation field?
Yes, my education actually started out with working on a degree in architecture. And it wasn't until my junior year that I discovered park management, park administration program and transferred into that program. So I ended up graduating in 1961 with a BS degree in park administration. And in 1963, I graduated with a BS or an MS in the park management program from Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas.
Okay. And how did you come to be employed at Arizona State Parks?
Well, it's a bit of a long story. Actually, I started my professional career as an instructor at Texas Tech. And from there, I took on jobs in various agencies, and actually the first was landscape architect, and later as chief admin services for Maricopa County Parks and Recreation Department in Phoenix, Arizona. And from there I went to Norman, Oklahoma, where I served as superintendent of parks. And then for the next couple of years at Arkansas Tech, I was an instructor, and Arkansas Tech University actually is in Russellville, Arkansas, before I came to Arizona State Parks. And I came as the chief of planning for state parks, served as legislative liaison, as deputy director, and as executive consultant presently. And actually, I continue to do other duties as assigned.
And in your careers, you have been involved in drafting the first master plans for many park systems. For example, Texas State Parks, the Parks and Recreation Division in Norman, Oklahoma, and Arizona State Parks. What are some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, in the development of the Texas State Parks plan, which was my first involvement, I was a grad student at Texas Tech when I got involved in that, and it was an exciting program. And the interesting thing was when we went to talk to park staff, they actually were very reluctant to talk to us about any of the kinds of issues that they were having or problems, because I seemed very suspicious of us as students. And so we actually spent time on holiday weekends on the park, actually talking to people and observing how staff operated in order to make recommendations for that plan. And that plan was interesting because the plan, I've got to work on not only the plan, but also getting it approved. And through that process, then the state passed a major bond issue for state parks. And that resulted in them being able to update their existing facilities and also to add new parks. And the plan for Norman, Oklahoma City was also a bit of a challenge to get started because the Parks Board absolutely was not sure that we should be involved in spending our time doing that kind of planning. And so we had to lay out for them a sequence of events on why we needed to know what we had so that we could see if we were actually serving our public the way that we should and had the right kind of acreages or facilities to meet those needs. And once they understood that, they became very supportive of that. So there was a team that worked together on that plan with the state parks plan, and this was another first for Arizona. It was interesting because they weren't really sure exactly how we were going to do that. And initially there was a plan done, and the Parks Board was just really not comfortable with the plan and never did approve that plan. So we actually put another team of folks together, and I'm very much on the team philosophy and follow that to this date. But we put together a team that actually worked with park staff. We brought the park staff in to let them verbalize things that they felt like were important and needed to be addressed. And then we did the same kind of thing for the Parks Board and brought them in and let them express their opinions. So it was just a real, it was a lengthy process, but yet it was very rewarding when we got finished. And the Parks Board was very supportive of the plan, and it actually went to the governor and had governor approval on that plan. So that was an important step for our agency.
So can you tell me how the public participated in those plans?
Well, yes, and I have an interesting example because in initially doing planning for state parks, and I, as the chief, set up team to work on it. But at the time, our director was really reluctant to allow us to have the public participate in that planning process. And it took a time before we were able to convince him that it would be very supportive, we felt, for our entire planning process if we could get the public to participate with us. And so reluctantly, not only the director but the executive staff at the time allowed us to do that, and one said, well, we're going to try it once and see how this works. And that was with Red Rock State Park in Arizona. And with that, the committee that we had actually became such a support group and so excited about being involved in the plan and understanding park planning that they actually came to public meetings and spoke on behalf of the agency. Now, I can tell you, when you're in a political public meeting, that is extremely important element to have for the support of your plan, is because they can say things to elected officials that as state employees you'll never have the opportunity to say in that kind of setting. And then that group, they evolved into the first Friends for State Parks and the first volunteer group. And in Friends, we mean a financial support group. They actually call themselves benefactors, but the rest of the groups are Friends groups. So that was just one result of involving the public. And in others, we've had similar kinds of happenings where the public got so involved and so excited about the project that they were very supportive, and many of them did become friends. Now, I will tell you that in the planning process, there are also people that don't support your park. And here again, to me, in our planning process and in our team approach, I wanted those people to have an opportunity to sit on the committee, on the planning committee for the master plan for the park, simply because to have that information, if they're going to be opposed to it, get it up front so that your committee has the opportunity to go in and discuss that. So during the planning process, you can develop alternatives perhaps to that, and then maybe you have to agree that it just can't be resolved. But just having that keeps you from going to a public meeting and being blindsided by that concern coming out for the very first time without you knowing it. And then you have the public also has the opportunity to express their opinions to the individual that is concerned about whether it's the park project as a whole or whether there's a specific thing about it that they really don't want you to address. So these are the kind of things that come out during that planning process. So I totally support the idea of public participation. And to this day, we continue to have public participation in our planning processes.
So is it mostly at public meetings that you invite the public to come and talk to you?
Well, yeah, public meetings are yes, and then not only in support and in doing the planning, but once a plan is completed, then we actually do have a public meeting where we invite the entire community to come in and see what that is, to take their input. Initially, the planning committee is set up of people that represent larger groups, but that can come in and speak on behalf of those groups, because you try to touch as many of those as you can during your process. But it's very important that you build the trust of the community, and the way to do that is through these planning efforts. So as a park system, there are times that people just feel like you're going to take our land or you're going to take our water, because those are the kind of places that the public likes to go. And they really are very resistant to doing that. So bring them in on the process and let them understand about what you're doing, but also as an individual, you can meet and talk with those folks. And it's very helpful to go one-on-one in the planning, in part of your planning process, because they're not as threatened as they are if a large group comes. So I say, go out to the public and ask them what they think. Don't expect them to come to your office and tell you, because that just doesn't work. If they do, it's usually a problem. So if you really want to get their help, you need to go out to them. And I would say a lot of times you can go as just an individual. If they know you as a person, you're no longer the state or the city or just a governmental employee to them. You become a real person. And then when you have that kind of relationship, it just does wonders for your process, because they feel like that they can talk to you and understand you, and you can talk to them. And many times in our processes, we've resulted or had results that were, they just offered up property value to go with your project. And by that I mean they were selling their property, but they were selling it for less than appraised value. And so by making that donation, and in one specific instance, we got better than $250,000 in donated value of property, just because people understood and were appreciative of the process that we were following and the project that we were working on. So those kind of things result from working with the public.
Fantastic. Whenever we discuss your accomplishments, you speak about the team that you worked with to accomplish various goals. Could you speak more to your philosophy on teams and teamwork in getting the work of park management done?
Oh, I love that, because I feel like that when you're in a park situation, many times the staff is overlooked in the process. And so you have the staff and the public and others that are interested. But go to your staff and ask them, what are your thoughts about this? That they deal with the public every day. You couldn't work with a more informed source than the park staff that's working on the individual park. Or if they're working on a park and you get new land, they can certainly tell you about the issues that you may face or the things that you could definitely consider in that planning process. And so to me, doing that kind of research, when you have that opportunity of working with them, I just feel like too many times we overlook that. And really through the planning process, and well, any kind of planning process that you put together, if you talk with people, if you get them to think about the things that you're doing and to provide thoughts and ideas, you're going to come out with a far better product. And when you do go to a public meeting, you have much better public acceptance of that project than you would just going by yourself. And no, I've been there both ways. And so I think so highly of this, and I think the staff is overlooked, and the public is sometimes overlooked, and many times with public, it's hard to identify exactly what their issues are, and you need to be patient and talk with them, talk it through, so that you can, and keep asking questions until you understand exactly what it is that they're having the problem with. Because many times, just the first surface issue is not the issue at all. It may be totally different. So work with them, find out that information, and then take it from there to see if you can help resolve those issues.
Thank you. So throughout your long career, you've served many roles, including those of educator, landscape architect, planner, legislative liaison, and administrator. In each of these roles, you've had the opportunity to work with and speak to many different people. Let's talk about some of the relationships that you have built throughout the years and how these relationships have contributed to your ability to contribute to the field of parks and recreation.
Okay, yes, because I have actually had the opportunity, because of the supervisors that I had giving those opportunities to me, to actually be involved in all phases of park development. So it's helped to create systems by being able to do these things. So the first thing is in legislation, and you have to have legislation or city council approval or whatever the governmental level is. But because I'm with the state parks, it was the legislature. And working with those folks, you have to be sure that they understand what you're doing. But once they found out about the parks, many of them became very supportive of the parks program through, or because we were asking for legislation to create new parks, became very interested, and we ended up with some extremely nice parks as a result of that. Well, then in the acquisition, which comes along next, I mean, yes, I was chief of planning, but at times it got to where we needed to acquire a piece of property. Then you need to learn. One needs to make themselves available to learn how to do that, to go through a process to acquire property. Well, to do that, you've got to have a budget. So you're going to have money, and where's the money? Well, it's going to come from either the legislature or the Parks Board. So you get them to buy in and get the money appropriated so that you can acquire the properties. Then you can do your master plan. And here again, that public involvement, your staff involvement and public involvement in those processes will certainly benefit through that whole process. And if you have this public, they'll actually be supportive all the way through to the opening of that park for public use. And that is a really exciting feeling to be there on the day that it's open, when you've been involved in every step of that process, from legislation to the planning, to the acquisition, and through the development, and then to have that day finally come when that's open and see the public's reaction to the things that you've been able to provide. So it's an exciting thing to be involved in. And the people that I've met, well, of course, I was legislative liaison for 5 years. Well, you work directly with legislators, and if you cannot build a good relationship with legislators, you will not be able to get anything passed that would be supportive of your agency. And particularly when you're asking for appropriations or major monies for acquisition or development. That just won't happen. So that's an important step. And in some of the public committees that I worked with, actually those people ended up being appointed to the Parks Board in later years. And so it's interesting because they've already had firsthand knowledge about what parks are about before they come onto the board. So that was very helpful and beneficial. Also had the opportunity to work with one governor, directly with the governor, and where you had staff meetings to go to give progress reports to the governor about what you were doing. So it really is helpful. And then other agencies, you need to have other agencies that have similar goals that you have. Work with those agencies and get yourself acquainted with people in those agencies, because they can be very helpful in doing your planning. They can be helpful in helping you decide about properties or things that will work and won't work. And maybe it's an agency that you're having to rent property from. And you need to know how their processes work so that you will know how to best utilize the things they have to offer. A lot of our properties have been federal lands, and so it's important to know how that federal entity works and what you can do and can't do with specific types of properties. So in your acquisition process, not all acquisition is purchase outright of property. It's lease, it's donation, it's it's just all kinds of other ways that you acquire properties, and some have reversionary clauses and some don't. But that means if you don't use it for the purpose, it reverts back. So you need to understand that, because if you try to change the use of the property, then you're going to run into those kind of situations. Or you may have to revert or give funds back to certain entities if you've expended those monies and something happens to that property, or you want to change it, then you may have to pay back. So these are important elements to know. And I would say in property, it's the things that you need to know is not only in order for you to get it, but somebody may bring you a donation. Well, you want to know all you can know about that piece of property before you recommend to the board that they accept it as a donation, because it may be a wonderful donation and it may be somebody's problem, and you would prefer not to have you don't want to be the one recommending that they accept a problem. So you would have to go through and check out these things. So there's a lot of background work that needs to be done before you make a recommendation. It's not, you can say, well, it looks good on the surface, but does it have access? Well, I don't know. So you need to check that and find out. Are these the actual property boundaries? Is that what we're going to be getting, or is it, are we going to get something else? So, it's just a lot of details to keep up with.
Okay, so who are some of the people who have influenced you?
Oh, they have influenced me. Every supervisor I've had has influenced me because they brought different thoughts and ideas, and the way that they approached issues was very important to me. And most of those supervisors were very encouraging. And here again, the teams that I've worked with, the people have been influential on those teams because they brought thoughts and ideas that maybe I'd never had before. And I appreciate that. And in one of those, in 1986, I went with the chief of operations to all of the parks to solicit thoughts and ideas from the park staff. And it was just very interesting to me because they seemed to say they appreciated it and they felt like they were more a part of the agency than they had been. And some of them even sent thank you notes, saying that they just appreciated us coming and asking their opinion because they hadn't experienced that in the past. And so I just think that was influential. Then I would particularly express appreciation to the Arizona State Park Director that allowed me to use the public in our planning process, because that really was a major issue, and one where it was perceived that it was a loss of control for the state park agency to involve the public. So I would just say thank you for that opportunity, because it did prove that we could do it, and it would be a big help to the entire agency.
And what about in school? Were there any influences from your school life that influenced you in your career?
Yes. Well, of course, the head of the department at Texas Tech, Park Administration Department, really was a great person, but he was very difficult at times, could be, and was very demanding. That would require you to maybe give a 30-minute presentation, and then you get up to give the presentation, and he allows you 5 to 10 minutes to make that entire presentation. But this was a learning lesson for all of us, to be able to condense information and then to provide the pertinent points of that information to your audience. And he would have us consider in our plans every environmental aspect of the property that you were working on. You had to know what resources were on there, and you had to work around those. You didn't have the opportunity to move them out of the way. You just worked with it. And he actually required in our senior year to build scale models of the projects that we were working on. And that in turn showed not only our clients, but the students exactly what that park or that you were designing was going to look like when you got through. So it was with a great appreciation that I have for him now. Also, at a time of trouble, he was there for you. After you graduated, he would help you find jobs, find places to go, or if you were having problems in the job that you were in, he was certainly willing to discuss it with you and offer alternatives, or said, okay, if they don't appreciate the work you're doing, we'll find somebody that will. Now, that's the kind of individual he was, so I had a great appreciation for him.
Great. And so what advice would you provide students or young professionals in the field of parks and recreation?
I would say one of the first things is get involved. Because committees are so important, I would strongly recommend that as a student, you volunteer to serve on a committee if you can. And if you can't, then go to meetings where committees are working and just get an understanding of how the dynamics of how those things really do work, because they're very important, and then you understand what kind of people are on those committees and what the thoughts and ideas are from that. But just work with them. It's a learning process for you, but it offers a lot to your perspective for your future. Then I would say, if there's someone that you know of that is doing a job that you think you would really like to do, well, talk to them and see if you could shadow them. And by that I mean spend time with them, like a day if possible, or maybe just a half day. But just spend time with that person, seeing what they really do, and is that something you're really interested in? So I think that's another critical element, is just help you learn. And then you need to think about legal issues, because that's such an important aspect of everything that you do now, is the legality of it. So I would strongly encourage students to go in and take a class in law, a basic class in law, just to have a beginning understanding. Because you can get in legal issues or water rights. If you're in the western part of the United States, water rights can be very critical, and if you're buying property with them, you need to have some basic understanding of that. So I'm not sure that you get that in a class, but if you could, that would be helpful to do. Give speeches, or take class in speech to help you try to organize your thoughts, and to give you the ability to project and to carry on conversation. Conversation is really all you've got when you come down to it, and your thoughts and ideas. So it's extremely important that you understand how to best portray those to other people, because you may end up in a situation where the terminology that you're used to speaking is not terminology that the general public may understand. So consequently, you need to be able to adapt that. So just think about those kind of things. But I think it's such an exciting field, and there's all kinds of areas to get into. But even if you're just a planner, make yourself available for other things. Look at other things that are of interest or that might come into that, because environmental design, so you're going to need to know plant materials. So you just need to know about what kinds of things on sites. A little archaeology is not going to hurt you. At least in Arizona, we've got a lot of archaeological sites that one has to give consideration to before you can do any kind of development. So it's just knowing a little bit about a lot of different things is much more helpful than just thinking, well, I'll just take my basic classes and that'll be it. Budget. Oh my gosh, budget is, and so many people come out and don't have any understanding of how you go about budgeting. So a little touch of budget would be extremely helpful. Anybody in any part position, but I say particularly in the planning area, it's just a wonderful thing to have with you. And you know, and part of the law is legislation, and maybe you could have the opportunity of at least setting in on a legislative hearing as a student, or maybe just spend the day with a page at the House or the Senate and see how those committees work, because that's another a different kind of committee work altogether. And it's interesting because they operate much different than your public committees. Even though they have open public presentations, it's still learning how to address the chair and the members of the committee, and I mean, there's a whole procedure that goes with that. And I would say, you know, if you're going to be involved in legislation, you've got to know the staff that works for the legislators. It's so important in building that kind of relationship with them. So get in there and meet those that you're going to be working with. But it's helpful too, even if you're not doing legislation, just to have a good understanding of how the political structure works. If you're going to be working with the governor, you need to be prepared for that. It's another whole thought process that you go through in dealing with those issues. But I just think, to me, it's a very exciting time, and I would encourage people to get involved. It's not just resource management. It's, okay, you've got to know all these other things that go along with that. So prepare yourself for just a little broader education. Wouldn't hurt. And I know that people probably couldn't get involved in all of these, but as I was just thinking about students coming up now and coming through the classes, gosh, it would have been nice to known at the time that this and this and this. And I would tell you now too that the universities are actually teaching strategies in dealing with public process now that when we were going through, it was just by trial and error. It wasn't a structured, there wasn't a document for you to look at to understand that. So take advantage of the kinds of things that are available to you now that can help you deal with these before you actually get into them. Dealing with people, that's another, or a short course. Yeah, just you don't have to take full classes, but just expose yourself to some of those kind of things. Be very beneficial in your professional career.
What about making mistakes? How afraid should young professionals be of making mistakes?
Do not be afraid of making mistakes at all. It's going to happen. And I would say, don't be afraid of the having public feedback or staff feedback. Yes, some of it's going to be negative, but you need to learn how to deal with that. And so yes, there will be failures along the way, but I would just tell you, don't let your life stop right there. Just continue and said, okay, we learned from that one, we won't do that again. And we just move on to the next thing. And don't be afraid to ask people for help, because I think you'll really be surprised how willing people are to help you once you ask. So just don't be afraid to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Charles.